for the most monstrous crime of all time. For this is the story of a demagogue, a demoniacal genius with criminal sadistic intentions, and his ruthless cohorts, participants in a story about a gang of killers who embarked on a mass annihilation of millions of human beings. This is a story compounded of human degradation beyond comprehension. A highly organized scheme that used every device known to modern science, but deliberately twisted for the infliction of agonizing torture, of awesome power heaped on mountains of human corpses. This is the revolting story of Adolf Hitler, the Nazi Party, and National Socialism. A movement nurtured by a savage determination to ravage and destroy, a movement that bathed itself in an ocean of human blood.
Strand, weit geht jetzt die Fahrt. Wollen einverziehen, wo die Kirchen blühen, manches Mädel auf uns hart. Silvester wird, ich schenk uns noch was ein. Nehmen jetzt Abschied von dem rot-goldenen Wein. Ade Polenland, ade weißer Strand, Leben und Wohl. Ja, das ist Soldatenleben, ob im Warschau oder Prag. Müssen wir auch morgen kämpfen, heute lacht der helle Tag. Haben wir auch Vivo getrunken und der Feuerling Abend, Jacka gewunken bis die letzten Treiben ab und uns nach Hause lang. Haben wir auch Vivo getrunken und der Feuerling Abend, Jacka gewunken bis die letzten Treiben ab und uns nach Hause lang.
That was Ade Polenland, a typical German march that the Nazis played at mass rallies. Happy, isn't it? But there is nothing happy about this story. From the very beginning, it was a tale of horror. From the very beginning, the sanctity of human life was violated. It all started after the First World War when Adolf Hitler took over the National Socialist Workers' Party and outlined a program aimed at building a super state. Thus spoke Adolf Hitler before a crowd of 2,000 disgruntled Germans in the fest hall in the famous Hofbrauhaus in Munich. It was 1920, and all kinds of discontented people were searching for a reason and a cause to believe in. When his program was all set, Hitler started to line up his followers. First, he organized the brown shirts, or stormtroopers, he planned to use as his shock troops. Next, he formed the Defense Corps, a small personal bodyguard known as the black shirts. Their insignia was the death's head. Then he designed a flag, in the center of which was a black hooked cross, the swastika. This was supposed to symbolize the superiority of the Aryan race. The Nazis promised miracles, and they accompanied their promises with music, martial music that was appropriate for millions of goose-stepping Germans, music that began with a fanfare and thundering drums, music that inflamed people with wild patriotic fervor, music like this march, played by a Nazi stormtrooper band.
Yeah. sich ein Herz und Denken, für das Vaterland auf das sein Blut, gibt mir seine Hand, seine weiße Hand, dem Wohl mein Herz, dem Wohl mein Herz, dem Wohl, denn wir fahren,
At first, instead of military might, the Nazis glorified the worker. They hoped that by doing this, they would strengthen Germany for war. Arbeit macht frei. Work makes one free. This was their slogan, and in this way they hid their true purpose, to enslave the entire world. With master strategy, they seized control of every branch of the German government. They took away civil liberties, destroyed all who stood in their way. They found that music could incite beast-like behavior, could rouse the desire to kill, pillage, rape. There were songs describing Jewish blood spurting under the knife, songs urging the destruction of Catholicism, songs that glorified a common criminal, Horst Wessel, a hoodlum who died violently in a street fight and was made a national hero in what became the official Nazi anthem. Just listen to the melody. It's quite appealing. It's warm, almost heroic. But bear in mind, it fomented the most vicious kind of inhuman cruelty, like an instrument of evil. Hitler knew exactly how to encourage fanaticism and how to generate hysteria. None were more committed to their grisly tasks than the company he kept gathered around him. Killers, sadists, known perverts and drunkards, all of them. Here are a few of the important ones being introduced at a huge Nazi Party rally at the Berlin Sportspalast by Rudolf Hess, Minister of the Third Reich. Notice the enthusiastic response and obvious enjoyment of the crowd as each Nazi speaks.
Dank Ihrer Führung wird Deutschland sein Ziel erreichen, Heimat zu sein. Heimat zu sein für alle Deutschen der Welt. Sie waren uns der Garant des Sieges. Sie sind uns der Garant des Friedens. Adolf Hitler! Sieg Heil! Sieg Heil! Sieg Heil!
The hall is packed and a sea of faces fills the nearby streets. First to speak is Otto Dietrich, Nazi Party boss.
Denn die Wahrheit ist das Fundament, mit dem die Macht der Presse steht und fällt. Und dass man die Wahrheit über Deutschland berichtet, das ist die einzige Forderung, die wir an die Presse auch des Auslandes stellen.
Julius Streicher, Gauleiter of Nuremberg and boss of the stormtroopers.
Ein Volk, das nicht auf die Reinheit seiner Rasse hält, geht zugrunde.
Robert Leib, boss of the German Labor Front.
All unsere Arbeit muss von einem einzigen Gedanken beherrscht werden, den deutschen Arbeiter zu einem aufrechten, stolzen und gleichberechtigten Volksgenossen zu machen.
Hans Schrank, Nazi legal brain and notorious military governor of Poland.
Ich kann nur als Führer der deutschen Rechtsdiener sagen, dass da das Fundament des nationalsozialistischen Staates die nationalsozialistische Rechtsordnung ist, für uns unser oberster Führer auch der oberste Gerichtsherr ist. Und dass wir, die wir wissen, wie heilig gerade unserem Führer die Grundsätze dieses Rechtslebens sind, auch Ihnen Volksgenossen versichern können, Ihr Leben, auch Ihr bürgerliches Dasein ist gesichert in diesem nationalsozialistischen Staat der Ordnung, der Freiheit und des Rechts.
Joseph Goebbels, propaganda minister and party insider with Hitler himself.
Möge die helle Flamme unserer Begeisterung niemals zum Erlöschen kommen. Sie allein gibt auf der schöpferischen Kunst einer modernen politischen Propaganda Licht und Wärme. Es mag gut sein, Macht zu besitzen, die auf Gewehren ruht. Besser aber und beglückender ist es, das Herz eines Volkes zu gewinnen und es auch zu behalten.
Hitler considered himself a great orator. He was fascinated by his own diabolical logic. Here he is urging 200,000 young Germans assembled inside and outside the Berlin Sportspalast to actively take part in the Nazi orgy of human destruction.
Meine deutsche Jugend, nach einem Jahr kann ich euch hier wieder begrüßen. Ihr seid heute hier in dieser Muschel nur ein Ausschnitt dessen, was außer ihr über ganz Deutschland steht. Und wir möchten nun, dass ihr, deutsche Jungen und deutsche Mädchen, in euch all das aufnehmt, was wir dereinst uns von Deutschland hoffen. Wir wollen ein Volk sein. Und ihr
meine Jugend soll dieses Volk nun werden. Wir wollen einst keine Klassen und Stände mehr sehen. Und ihr dürft in euch schon nicht mehr groß werden lassen. Wir wollen einst ein Reich sehen. Und ihr müsst euch schon dafür erziehen. Wir wollen, dass dieses Volk einst gehorsam ist. Und ihr müsst euch in dem Gehorsam üben. Wir wollen, dass dieses Volk einst friedliebend und aber auch tapfer ist. Und ihr müsst friedfertig sein. Als mit uns verbunden. Und wenn die großen Kolonnen unserer Bewegung heute siegend durch Deutschland marschieren, dann weiß ich, ihr schließt euch den Kolonnen an. Und wir wissen,
always music took over. The Nazi propaganda machine made certain that there were plenty of popular marches and pieces by the leading German composers to stir the faithful and win them over to unswerving loyalty to the swastika. Typical is this one, which is played here by a military band. That was Marka Shahida, a favorite German march played by one of the official Nazi party bands. Heroic music for a super race. But music wasn't the only device Adolf Hitler used to stage an impressive show. There were flashy uniforms, fancy medals, elaborate decorations, torchlight parades, huge bonfires, athletic exhibitions, and extermination camps. At first, thousands of unsuspecting victims were taken into what was called protective custody, but this was not what the Nazis really wanted, and so they devised what they called the final solution. Death camps, Auschwitz, Buchenwald, Bergen-Belsen, Dachau, Sachsenhausen, Treblinka, terminal points built with electrified barbed wire, gas chambers, and crematoria. There were 30 extermination camps scattered throughout Western Europe, and in these, the German butchers killed and carried out their gruesome blueprint of slaughter. Men, women, and boys and girls, children and infants in their mothers' arms. None were spared. It was typical to hear a band playing something the Germans called Gemütlichkeit, while tens of thousands of men, women, and children were sent to choke to death in gas chambers and then burned in huge ovens. Generally, the musicians were concentration camp inmates themselves, forced to perform in fear for their own lives while their comrades marched to their doom. This is the fiendish mind that only yesterday gave terrible and personal new meaning to words like gas oven, genocide, purge. This is the cunning mastermind that promised German youth, and incidentally, he meant your world. Here he is speaking at a mammoth rally in a Munich arena filled with 75,000 of his worker servicemen, as he called them, and an additional 200,000 persons hear his voice on the outside blasting over loudspeakers.
Hergerufen hat als das Gebot ihres Herzens, nicht hergerufen hat als das Gebot ihrer Treue. Es würde ein Frevel sein, wenn wir jemals sinken ließen, was mit so viel Arbeit, so viel Sorgen, so viel Opfern und so viel Not erkämpft und errungen werden musste. Man kann nicht dem untreu werden, was einem ganzen Leben Inhalt, Sinn und Zweck gegeben hat. Es wird nicht so etwas aus nichts, wenn diesem Werden nicht ein großer Befehl zugrunde liegt. Und den Befehl gab uns kein irdischer Vorgesetzter, den gab uns der Gott, der unser Volk geschaffen hat. So sei denn unser Gelöbnis an diesem Abend, in jeder Stunde, an jedem Tag, nur
zu denken an Deutschland, an Volk und an Reich, an unsere deutsche Nation. Unser deutsches Volk siegt heil! Sieg heil! Sieg heil!
Quote, the final solution. This is the term the Nazis came to use for the annihilation of 7 million Jews. And meanwhile, millions of others who died in the bloodbath of persecution and aggressive war that followed. 400,000 Americans, 26 million Russians, 350,000 Englishmen, 450,000 Frenchmen, 10 million Poles, 2,000 Catholic priests, all at the hands of the Nazi terror. Almost 15% of the population of Europe perished in 6 short years. And through it all, through all this ghastly bloodletting, German workers and industrialists alike prospered and grew fat as they made machines for killing people more efficiently. The music kept pace. Just imagine this march played here by a German army band as a prelude to death for the thousands of Nazi victims being machine-gunned into huge mass graves. The Nazis sang and talked about joy and freedom, of how work meant life. Meanwhile, they continued the cavalcade of death. By the hundreds of thousands, people were wiped off the face of the earth. Official Nazi orders in such circumstances called for special treatment. Torture, shootings, hanging by the neck with piano wire or from meat hooks, gassing, poisoning, strangulation, freezing alive in ice water, forcing bodies to burst apart, simulating high altitude in vacuum chambers, whipping, electrocution. Pregnant women were violated brutally and otherwise tortured. Women at the moment of childbirth had their hands tied and their legs strapped together. Distinguished Nazi doctors performed loathsome experiments, inhumane operations. People were injected with air, phenol, unmentionable animal secretions, just to see what would happen. Corpses were dumped into mass graves or burned in gas ovens. Human skin was peeled from human bodies and made into lampshades. Bones were made into fertilizer, and ashes into soap. All this while Hitler continued to preach his gospel of a master race and world conquest. Listen to him as he addresses almost 1 million fanatic followers at a Congress of the Nazi Party in Nuremberg.
Es Es ist unser Wunsch und Wille, dass dieser Staat und dieses Reich bestehen sollen in den kommenden Jahrtausenden. Wir können glücklich sein zu wissen, dass diese Zukunft restlos uns gehört. Wenn die älteren Jahrgänge noch wanken werden könnten, die Jugend ist uns verschrieben und verfallen mit Leib und mit Seele. Denn die Idee und die Bewegung sind Lebensausdruck unseres Volkes und damit ein Symbol des Ewigen. Es lebe die nationalsozialistische Bewegung! Es lebe Deutschland!
You know, Adolf Hitler nearly made it. If he had pushed his luck in a slightly different direction, he might have won. And you and I and our families then would have died horribly like the 100 million souls who lost their lives and the countless others who have been enslaved. The Nazis left the world a heritage of death and destruction, of tragedy and fear for the brave fathers and helpless mothers and innocent children whose bodies were piled high upon the altar of pagan Nazi Germany. There is no epitaph, nor is there retribution. A mere handful of Nazi arch-criminals have paid with their lives for their crimes. Shamefully few have been brought to trial by the Germans. Today, Germans seem merely to be embarrassed. Most of them profess to know little or nothing about the carnage. But we know that they know, and we must beware of the future. For the rotten seed of Nazism is still implanted, and perhaps under some other name or some other guise, it could sprout again.